So to ruin this color at this point seemed very silly. Now, is that a sunk cost fallacy? We'll see in a moment, but hi, hello, my name is Allie. I'm an independent graphic designer coming to you from just outside Toronto, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me. Today I've got updates on a couple different works in progress, but before we get into that, today I am drinking out of my Yelena James mug. Isn't it beautiful? And I'm drinking the David's Tea Cardamom French Toast, which is one of the kind of like fun, like sugary David's Tea teas that I really love, but kind of will forever be second string in my mind because it's really just the closest I can now get to what used to be my favorite tea of theirs, and I used to like only drink David's Tea. I was like a diehard, and that was their cardamom macchiato. That was my like first thing in the morning, every single morning tea for so long, and then they discontinued it. It was really devastating to me. And their cardamom French toast that they occasionally bring back, I think seasonally as like a holiday or winter tea, is the closest that I can now get. So actually, if you have figured out like a dupe of the David's Tea cardamom macchiato, please let me know because I will be forever in your debt. As for what I'm wearing today, this is my Barnsley sweater by Cheryl Mokhtari. Now this sweater is from before I was really aware of the issue of size inclusivity, so unfortunately this pattern only accommodates up to a 48-inch bust, which we do not love. Editing Alley here. I forgot to do my cost per wear on this one. So this garment cost me $160 to make in the first place, and I have since worn it 39 times since I finished it in, I think, the fall, like late fall of 2013. So that brings our total cost per wear to $4.10 currently. I feel like I've gotten a decent amount of wear out of this so far since it's only been like a year and a half. 39 times, that's pretty solid. And I continue to really love this sweater. I find it really cozy and useful. It's not quite as heavy as some of my other ones, so it's a good option to have around. And yeah, I think that this cost per wear is going to keep working its way down over time. Okay, so the first whip that I want to give you an update on is my Leon sweater by Petite Knit. So this is a pattern that costs 50 Danish kroner or about 10 Canadian dollars. I'm knitting the size 2, and the pattern accommodates up to a 59-inch bust, which I asked in my recent video. I was like, why are there so many patterns that go up to a 59-inch bust, which is so close to that 60-inch benchmark that we tend to use to judge whether a pattern is size inclusive or not. And a couple people pointed out, and I think this is probably exactly what it is that it's just a rounding issue because Petite Knit patterns are designed primarily in the metric system, right? And then everything else is just being converted from there. So it just happens that the kind of nearest round number that works as a good centimeter benchmark for size inclusivity just happens to convert out to 59 inches rather than 60. So I think I can probably stop giving everyone a hard time who lands at 59 inches. Now there has been a lot of progress on this sweater since the last time that you saw it, and also I feel like I should situate us in time a little bit right now because I'm about to have a really busy few weeks, so I'm actually filming this way in advance of when you're gonna see it. So I'm filming this on February 6th, which means it's been just over a month since I cast this on January 1st. And the last time that you saw the sweater, there was about this much of it. I had gotten just up to the point where I was about to start the stripes, and we now have a lot of stripes. In fact, we have almost an entire sweater's worth of stripes. I'm so close to done this. It's actually kind of painful to me that it's as close to done as it is, but I don't have a finished object to show you. But it's one of those things where it's sort of deceptively like so close yet so far because where I'm actually at is that I have finished the sleeves, except that I need to do the sewn bind off on them, but I first want to block to make sure they are the correct length. And then on my body, I am working on the bottom ribbing, but not quite done. Again, so close. But even once I finish that, again, I want to block to check my length. And then I have to spend many hours doing a sewn bind off. So it's not a thing where like, if I had just managed to sneak in an extra hour or two of knitting this week, it would be finished, which is why I didn't do that in time for filming. We're still farther away than it looks like we should be, considering that there is like 99.99% of a sweater here, but there's still some work to do. And I think to kind of, because it's so close to finish and looks so finished, I'm going to hold off on trying this on for today's video because I kind of just want to save that at this point as a reveal for the video where it's actually a finished object. Also, I might kind of have an ulterior motive there because I knit these sleeves 2 at a time on one needle, and they're still on that needle because I haven't done the sewn bind off yet. So while trying it on is not impossible, I did do it to check my sleeve length. It's very awkward and tricky and feels like you're in a straitjacket and like trying to take a picture of the sweater while I was there like handcuffed by the needles. It was not ideal. I don't care to do that on camera. But so we are so close, which means that I have had a ton of time knitting on this since I last talked to you, which also means I have a lot of thoughts about it because a lot has happened. Before we get into all that though, I should tell you that I am knitting this on 4.5mm needles instead of the 4mm needles recommended in the pattern because I'm a tight knitter. And I'm knitting this out of Knitting for Olive Merino in the colors Blood Orange and Poppy Rose. So I ordered this yarn from La Maison Tricoté in Quebec. I ordered 7 balls of the Blood Orange and 4 of the Poppy Rose, which cost me $180.24. Shipping was free, so that's all just yarn cost. And I paid that much minus $100 because I had a couple of gift cards, which was awesome. It means that between what I spent on the yarn and the pattern, that brings my total project cost to $90 Canadian or about $64 US. So my main thoughts about this project are that it just absolutely flew. Like, I am just shocked by how fast this came together. When I was knitting this, so just after I recorded my last episode, I started my very first stripe, and I figured I'll just continue working on the body until I run out of one of the 2 balls because I'm doing stripes, I'm not gonna run out of both at the same time, where normally my MO with a sweater that's in the round and where sleeves are picked up and knit in the round after is that I will just knit body after splitting for sleeves until I run out of my ball of yarn so I don't have one dangling where it doesn't need to be. And then I will pick up and do the sleeves so that those are done, and finishing the body is actually the last thing that I do. But in stripes, like, one ball or the other is still going to be attached to the body, so that's not ideal. It's just some extra bulk that's in there that doesn't really need to be while I'm finishing the arms, but I also don't care enough to break the yarn and then have to rejoin and weave in more ends later because weaving ends is like the bane of my existence. So I was like, I'll just go until I run out of either my orange or my pink, and then I'll do my sleeves. I ran out of both at the exact same time. I mean, not the exact same time, but like, I finished my pink stripe, done with the pink yarn, and then I continued with the next orange stripe and ran out of orange while I was in the middle of that orange stripe. So like, functionally, as far as what I needed when, I ran out of them at the same time, and I was so happy about this. So this meant that I got to start my sleeves completely untethered from the body, which was wonderful. So I picked up my sleeves, and I was working my sleeves, like I said, 2 at a time on one needle, which I just really prefer to do. Especially these sleeves have decreases, so it means only having to keep track of my decreases one time and not having to make sure they match one sleeve to the other. And now it did occur to me that knitting a striped sweater with sleeves 2 at a time would require more careful yarn management than I am generally known for. I tend to run into issues with tangled yarn. I don't always remember to kind of move the strand to where, I'm attached here. I often don't remember to like move the working yarn like to the back or the front or wherever it kind of needs to be, like before I move on to the next one on the needle. So I was a little bit concerned that this might get me into some hot water, particularly where in this pattern you're knitting with 2 strands of a light fingering weight yarn held double. And to kind of minimize the amount of chaos, the amount of balls attached to my work at any given time, I was doing that by working from both ends of the same ball of yarn, so using both the outer and the inner ends. So I was working 2 sleeves, and each sleeve had 1 ball of each color. So I had a total of 4 balls on the go. And all of those balls I was pulling from both ends of the ball. So there's just a lot of potential for tangling going on there. And honestly, I was prepared for so much more chaos than actually happened. Like, I had it in my head going in. I was like, okay, we're gonna prevent chaos. We're gonna like get some Ziploc bags. We're gonna have each sleeve's yarn in its own bag and, you know, each feeding through its own little like hole poked in the bag. And that way the 2 sleeves yarns aren't gonna get all mixed up. And then it was time to start sleeves, and I was comfy on my couch and I didn't want to get up and get a Ziploc bag. So I just started them. I was like, I'm sure I'll be fine for the next like hour or so. And then it just kept being fine, and I just never felt incentivized to get a Ziploc bag. So things that I did do to help minimize yarn chaos is whichever color yarn I wasn't currently using, so say I'm working on an orange stripe, I was tucking the pink yarn balls inside its respective sleeve, so it was kind of out of the way, not around, able to be tangled with. I was also a little concerned that I might run into issues with knitting out of both ends of the same ball, doing 2 at a time, because I've been doing that with a pair of my dad's socks that I was working on at the end of last year, and I had found that in working 2 at a time, I was having the problem where if I forgot to move my working yarn, again, like to the front or back, wherever I was going to need it to be next time I got around to it, before I moved on to the next sock, then it was creating this huge tangle issue because now it's kind of having to like wrap around, and because it's 2 separate pieces pulling from the same ball, it's now kind of like wrapping around in an awkward way, and you can't fix it without breaking the yarn because there's no end of the yarn to like pull through. You can't just pull the ball through because then it's pulling the other end of the yarn around. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, so I wasn't sure if that was going to be an issue here because I have terrible spatial reasoning, and that's not a thing that I'm really able to like think through successfully in that way. But I'm pleased to report that I did forget to move the yarn multiple times in doing these sleeves, and it is not an issue in the same way when you are using 2 strands of the same ball on the same piece. It was an issue when I was using one end for one sock and one end for the other sock, but when two ends were going into the same sleeve, it was not a problem. So if you are interested in working two at a time and you like pulling from both ends, just bear in mind, easier to do, less of an issue, less remembering required if you're using both ends on the same individual piece and not on the two separate pieces. If I've been trying to use the outer end on one sleeve and the inner end on the other sleeve, that would have been a problem for me for sure. So when I was working on the sleeves, I was looking at the pattern and it's telling you, how many decreases you need, how often you're doing them. And it's sort of in like a big paragraph of text. And when I got to the end of the decreases, I was like, is that just the end of my sleeve? Because I'm looking at it thinking, I don't know if this sleeve really looks long enough. But I'm looking back at the pattern and I'm like, yeah, no, the next thing that I do from here is do the ribbing. That's the next direction. So, okay. And I even kind of like skimmed back to see like, did I miss? Did it tell me to knit a certain length? And I'm skimming back and I don't see that. So I'm like, weird. Okay, I guess petite knit is just petite. I guess these sleeves are just super short. Like I tried it on, I'm like, haha, if I stopped this right now and did ribbing, I would end up with like a 3/4 sleeve. Haha, I have long arms. That's funny. That's a thing that happens to me. Whatever, I'll just make my sleeves extra long. And I was relaying all this to my friend Lauren and she was like, have you considered doing a mid-project block? And initially I was like, why? It's not super wash. Like, I don't know. I don't really think that is going to be the thing here. But I also feel like now that I've said that to you, I have wished mayhem upon myself if I don't block it. So just to ward off the jinxing of myself that I definitely done in saying that, I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to block it. So I did. And wouldn't you know, it grew dramatically. And I was very confused because I have knit with this yarn many times before. I've used Knitting for Olive Merino in this sweater, among many other things. But I'm wondering now if the difference is that I'm pretty sure that every other time I've knit with it, I've held it with a mohair. And I'm wondering if, like, I know that the silk core in a mohair wouldn't have the same stretch and give that wool does. So I'm wondering if just maybe this yarn is prone to growing when it's not paired with something that's kind of forcing it to keep its shape. Like maybe when left unchecked, it actually does grow in a way that it wasn't able to in my past projects. So that was very interesting to me because it was very unexpected. And I was like, oh my God, Lauren, thank you. Because if I had knit these sleeves to the length that I thought they needed to be, they would be way too long now. So also I did that blocking and I was like, I'm so much closer to done this than I thought. Because of course, not only the sleeves got longer, but the body that I had knit thus far also got longer. So I was like, oh my God, we just went from being like, I'm done like this much body and most of my sleeves to like, no, you've got like basically whole sleeves and your body is also like 2/3 of the way done. So that was interesting to me. Now, even post-blocking, the sleeves still weren't like where I would want them to be, but they were at a place where if I were not 5'8", they probably would have been like a reasonable sleeve length on me, if I had just started the ribbing then, that would have worked for most people. But then I did go back and look at the pattern one last time before I really laid this idea to rest and was like, that's fine, I'm just gonna have to add 2 more inches. Like I often have to add 2 more inches to what sweaters tell you to knit the sleeves to. That's fine, that's normal for me. And then wouldn't you know, I found a sentence at the very beginning of that paragraph that apparently I had completely failed to notice every single time that I had skimmed back over it trying to figure out how long the sleeves were supposed to be. Are they just supposed to end when you're done the decreases? And wouldn't you know, she very clearly gives you a length that you're knitting the sleeve to, which is of course longer than where you are when you just finish the decreases. So I was like, okay, okay, great. It was there the whole time. The sleeves were not supposed to be finished at that point. The sleeves were in fact supposed to be a fairly reasonable length for me. I think I still ended up making them a little bit longer just because in this pattern you're supposed to end on your main color. So just depending on your exact row gauge, you may end up on one color or the other. And I was sort of at an in-between place where it was either like to end on my main color, I have to go like 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch shorter than it's recommending or like an inch longer than it's recommending. And I will always go for a long sleeve. So I chose the longer option. But I'm also glad that I had this confusion and then had this conversation with Lauren that prompted me to block it. Because if I had just knit it to the length that the pattern told me to and then blocked it, again, because I wasn't anticipate this amount of growth, the sleeves would have ended up too long. So that was for the best. Thank you, Lauren. There was also something really funny in just the pacing of the sweater and understanding where I was in it. Like, again, partly because it did grow and like I was shocked to find how close I was to done at that point that I was blocking it. But I remember feeling in the early phases of the project like, oh my God, I'm gonna run out of yarn. Like this is just gobbling yarn. Like I felt like the top portion of the sweater before you start the stripes, I felt like I had just used so much that I second guessed, triple guessed, quadruple guessed whether I had misunderstood the yarn quantities in the pattern, because there is a little bit of like an innate potential for confusion because you are knitting with strands held double, and that is what the pattern recommends. Like, this isn't just me trying to make a thinner yarn work, like that is what it calls for. And so the pattern does clearly state when it's giving yarn quantities, like this is the total amount of each color. Like, this is not the yardage for one strand that you then need to double. This is the doubled amount. This is the total amount. It says that. And I remembered reading that. But as I was knitting this up and it was just gobbling yarn, I was like, did I somehow misunderstand? Was there something funky in the translation that made me think that this was the way I was supposed to understand this, but I got it wrong? Like, I'm gonna run out of yarn. In the early stage of this, I truly thought there was like 2-to-1 odds that I was gonna run out of yarn. Like, I was not optimistic. And here I am, almost done. And I have almost an entire ball left. I just started. This is my 7th ball, my last ball of this. And I have an entire ball of the Poppy Rose left. Like, untouched, except that. It should be untouched. But remember how we've been talking about how I've been knitting out of both ends of the ball? And also how if I'm settled on the couch knitting uncomfortable, I don't want to get up and interrupt that. So there was a point in the project where it was time for me to start a new ball of the Poppy Rose. And the ball that I grabbed, I, found the outside end very easily because it's right there. But you know how some balls of yarn just like give up the middle strand easier than others? Like, some you can reach into, and these are the Knitting for Olive balls that come like pre-wound into a ball that you can knit from, right? Sometimes that middle strand is no problem, and other times you try to find it and instead you just end up kind of like pulling knot end pieces of the middle in awkward ways and kind of creating these weird, like, you can't find it and you're just making a mess of the inside trying to. And this ball was one of those. It just like would not give up the end. And I was like, ugh, God, like, okay, I'm gonna have to go take this to my ball winder and rewind it into a cake so that I actually get like both ends of it. That's annoying. But I didn't want to do that at that moment. So instead I just opened the next ball of it. And it was fine. It gave me the end just fine. And I didn't think twice about this because, again, in my head, I'm running out of yarn. So there was not a question in my mind that I would be using all these balls. And here, lo and behold, I'm at the end of my project and I should have a brand new untouched ball of yarn that I could hypothetically return and get my money back. And I can't because I torn the label off. And in fact, by the time I figured out that I wouldn't need it, I had already caked it because I had done that a few days before to like get it ready to use imminently. So I now have a completely intact cake of the Poppy Rose, which I do not know what I'm going to do with. It's not a color that I would knit a whole garment out of, I don't think. Like, that's just a color, it's just too fleshy on me. It's not a good color for a whole garment for me. So I don't really know what I'm going to do with that. Maybe I will find something else to use it as like an accent color for, and just maybe have to supplement it with more balls of it. I don't know. I'm just like kicking myself that I did this because like I could have had a brand new untouched ball left over, but here we are. So yeah, I really don't understand like the pacing of this sweater. Like, you know how on Ravelry you can indicate what % done a project you are? And of course we're always just kind of like doing our best guesstimate. And I don't think I've ever been further off than I was with this sweater. Like, when I thought I was like 30% done, I was like 60% done, you know? Like, it was just so deceptive. And somewhere between the top part that was just gobbling yarn and down here, I was like, where's the rest of this yarn going? Why is it, like, obviously I understand that it's striped and so like you're not going to be using up a color as quickly because you're using 2 colors, but I just the number of balls of yarn that were going away in the top half. Like, I was shocked that each sleeve actually, I think, used just under 1 ball of each color, and it used a little more orange, because what might not be immediately clear looking at the pattern is that the orange stripes are actually slightly thicker than the pink stripes. But I really thought that I was gonna have to join new balls on the sleeves, and that did not happen. And that was kind of the beginning of like, now this yarn feels like it's going further than I thought that it would. And then I got to the end of the body and I started the ribbing and was still on my second last ball of the orange, and in fact got quite far into the ribbing before I even had to start on the last ball, so I wasn't even sure if I was gonna need this at all. So it was just a very strange project to understand where I was in the project, if that makes sense. Like, I'm very happy that it's come together as quickly as it has. That's really fun, that's exciting. It's like almost done. But it was very confusing to me. So overall, this is a pattern that I would very highly recommend. I found this a very satisfying knit process. I really enjoyed the construction of the shoulders, which I talked more about in my last video, but basically like you're knitting this all in one piece. At no point are you seaming anything, but you get this beautiful like structured seam on the back of the shoulders. The shoulders have this really nice shaping. It's just it just feels like a really nice structured like store-bought knit, and it wasn't hard. And I also, again, I have no spatial reasoning, so I didn't at all understand like what the pattern was trying to get me to do. Like, I'm reading the directions and I'm just like, I'm just gonna trust you. I'm just gonna believe that this is gonna turn into something because I don't really understand what we're doing. And then it did, and look at it. It's so good. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. If you have not done a garment that's structured this way before, and maybe you're kind of intimidated by it, but like the look of the garments, I think that this is a great project to try it out on, because I really enjoyed it and I found it super satisfying to watch the shoulder construction like start to come together. So now that it's this close to done, I'm feeling very impatient to have it finished, but I've just been stuck in this awkward place the last several days where like when I have had time to knit, it's just been like the most mindless, like I can work on ribbing, but that's all I can do. So I haven't managed to convince myself to do the sewn bind off on the sleeves. And at this point I'm like, well then I might as well wait until I blocked it. Normally I wouldn't have felt a need to do that because I did block them when they were like relatively close to done, so like they can only grow so much from there, knock on wood. I guess I shouldn't say that because the sweater did surprise me once with blocking, but I feel like they will finish within some range that I'm fine with either way. I just haven't had the brain space to sit down and do a sewn bind off this week, so I would really like to do that to get this off the needle so I can like try it on comfortably and know that I'm happy with the length of the body and whatever, but we just haven't gotten there yet. Okay, the next whip I have to chat about is my Colette pullover by Sari Nordland. So this is a pattern that costs $6.90 in euros, and it accommodates up to between a 58 to a 62 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended positive ease that you want. And if you saw my last like regular podcast update episode, this one has sort of been in purgatory because, as I showed in the last episode, I started knitting it and I just was not sure about the gauge of it. I was just like, is this looking too open? Like, I had to upsize my needles pretty significantly to match Sari's gauge. And when I looked at her pictures up close, I could see that it is still a relatively open knit in hers too, but she was knitting it using a strand of mohair, which obviously just kind of helps to like fill in the gaps a little bit. Whereas I knit this out of the Wandering Flock Cotton Lino in the color Citrine because I loved the color so much. And I was looking to knit a sweater that was not just a pure wool sweater. Like, I was looking to knit something that could function as more of like a spring transitional weather kind of sweater that I could pull on when it's not super cold out without it being too heavy, and I thought this would be a great candidate. But then trying to match Sari's gauge without a fluffy yarn in there, I wasn't sure. I was like I kind of like this, but also, is this not what it's supposed to look like? And am I in fact gonna decide that I don't like how it looks when it's a whole garment? Like, is it just too open? And it was really interesting to me to see the comments on that video because it really felt like everybody got the impression that I really hated it and just like couldn't admit that to myself. There was a lot of like, listen to yourself, like you don't like it, change it, fix it. I was just like, I don't feel like I feel that way, but I guess I must have came off that way. Like, I think I truly felt more ambivalent than was obviously coming across. Like, I genuinely felt torn about it. Like, I could imagine a world where I do a whole garment like this and I really like how it turns out and find it a really sort of flexible, useful, transitional weather garment. But I could also potentially see it not pinning out that way, and I just didn't really know which way it was gonna go. So it was really funny to me to see that everybody was so convinced that I hated it. But so I kept thinking about it, and part of the problem that I mentioned in the last video is that the obvious solution here would just be to go down in needle size and go up in pattern size, right? To get it to still be the size that I actually want it to be. The problem is that I'm limited by the amount of cotton lino that I have. So I have 3 of these skeins, and these are 300 meter skeins. And based on that, based on my row gauge, I don't think I can go up a size and not run out. I'm pretty confident, knock on wood, I probably shouldn't say that I can knit the size 1 that I was intending to with my 3 skeins without playing yarn chicken. Though I think like worst case scenario, I would be okay with this one being like a 3/4 length sleeve because I am intending for it to be a lighter weight garment anyway. But because of that, the idea of going down a needle size, fitting in significantly more rows in the same amount of overall garment length, like I just don't have the yardage for that. Okay, Editing Alley here. I also wanted to mention that someone pointed out to me in a comment that I should be cautious around my yardage for the Colette pullover because so basically I thought that I had plenty, and this comment is what is making me think that I might be closer to not having enough than I originally thought, which is kind of feeding into all of this decision making because she said that a lot of times the estimates in Sari Nordland patterns are on the low end and often end up being a lot less than you actually use. In part, they suspect because Sari Nordland pattern testers aren't usually required to actually finish knitting the garment within the pattern testing period, which means that they're not able to give her the information of how much yardage they actually used when they completed the project. I think it's more just like getting through the project far enough that it's clear that the instructions are working, you know, once you get to a point of like, and then just keep knitting the body all the way down. Like there's not a whole lot that's going to change, right? So like I see how for most of the purposes of testing a pattern that's completely sufficient, but in terms of yardage estimates, it can kind of leave things a little up in the air. So that's just something that was kind of in my mind as I was making this decision as far as how much yardage do I actually have? Can I afford to go down a needle size and up a pattern size? And then the other obvious answer would be, we'll just use a mohair with it like Sari does, but I was just feeling like I just would like to not make this warmer than it currently is because, so I should mention, the Wandering Flock Cotton Lino, this is a 35% organic cotton, 30% mulberry silk, 20% linen, 15% baby alpaca, is that right? Yeah. So it's this really interesting combination of plant fibers and animal fibers that sort of has like a little bit of stretch to it, not as much as you'd expect from purely a wool, but also not as rigid as you would get from just a silk or a linen. Oh, I also want to address, I had a few people commenting on my last video being like, well, I think the reason that you're having trouble is that this pattern is written for DK weight yarn and the yarn you're using, the cotton lino, is classified as a sport weight. And this, you are correct. Here's what happened. So when the cotton lino was released, I, first of all, saw this color, became obsessed. Second of all, read the description, and the description on the website says, because of the combination of animal and plant fibers in this yarn, we have found it suitable for fingering weight through DK weight projects. So they classify it as sport weight and then describe it that way. And this is where I made my fatal error because I should have known. Allie, you knit tight. In no world was a yarn going to give you more bulk, more thickness than it is like physically in its essence defaulting to. No sport weight yarn is ever gonna behave for you like a DK weight. Maybe it would do that for Sari Nordland. I don't know. It would not do it for me. And I should have known that. I think I just read that description and then got it in my head. Oh, DK weight. I think that's all that I registered. And I thought no further than that. So this is how I've ended up in the position of trying to knit a DK weight pattern with a sport weight yarn and having this problem. So that's how we got here. The problem though is the color. Matching that color is not super easy. The other thing that I learned on my last video is that everybody thinks this sweater is yellow. And I'm not sure if that means that I need to work on my color grading, which I probably do. Or if most people think of chartreuse as yellow, because to me, chartreuse is a green. It's an extremely yellowy green. But like, gun to my head, is it yellow or green? It's green. But it would appear that everybody else disagrees. Or that it was just looking really yellow in that video. I'm not sure. Now that you know that it's chartreuse, is it still yellow? Report back. But anyway, as I think evidenced by the is it green or is it yellow, chartreuse walks a very fine line. And so each individual shade of it is so particular that it's really kind of tricky to find a color match. It's not a super popular color to begin with. It did have kind of a moment of popularity, I think a year or two ago. So some yarn brands added it as an option when maybe it wasn't there before, but it's still not universal. You know, it's not like a standard color that's part of every standard color range. But I was looking on the website for the Knitting Loft in Toronto and noticed that the Tin Lena comes in a color that looked very promising to me. And I was like, okay, I think this is going to be it. I think this is going to be my solution. But I was like, okay, I'm a graphic designer. I know that screens can lie. The way things look on a screen, depending on the color grading, all of these things might not be accurate to real life. So maybe I should save myself some trouble. I'm gonna be driving sort of through the area soon anyway. Let me just go to the Knitting Loft, check it out in person rather than ordering it online. So I went to the Knitting Loft. I went and found the Sandskarn Tin Lena, and I found that it was green. Not like chartreuse's green, but like green. Like a very light green apple green. And I was like, it's not gonna do what I want it to do. That's gonna make it look marled. That's just gonna make this a green marled sweater. That's not what I want. So then I go from I'm on a mission, find the Sandskarn Tin Lena. Now I'm looking sort of aimless, just kind of browsing the whole store, just looking for the color chartreuse. This is when I met an angel. I think her name was Vanessa. Shout out to Vanessa from the Knitting Loft. This woman spent, I believe, upwards of half an hour with me scouring the store for chartreuse. And bless her, she was wearing a chartreuse vest. So she was like, I understand. I am with you. I understand how difficult it is to find the perfect chartreuse. So she was, without question, the woman for the job. We looked at everything in the store that could possibly remotely be paired with this. And what was actually really funny to me while we were going around the store, like evaluating options, we encountered a few different people in the store who were either other people who worked there or just other knitters overhearing our conversation. And so many people were like, oh my God, I can never get gauge on Sari's patterns. Like my gauge always looks too open too. I don't know how she's getting DK weight out of these things that she's knitting with. So it appears that it's not just a me problem. There was definitely some me problems going into my yarn selection, as mentioned, spore weight, all of the above. But it seems like it is not an uncommon experience to have a really hard time meeting gauge on Sari Nordlund patterns. And I've knit one of her patterns before. I knit her Sunday Monday socks, I believe, but it's a sock. And I think that one actually, I have no idea how my gauge would have compared to her gauge because I modified that pattern heavily to deliberately use a way bigger yarn than the pattern calls for. So this was my first time trying to match Sari's gauge and it was an epic fail. But at least I learned that I'm not alone because everyone else apparently has trouble matching her gauge too. Now, unfortunately, there was absolutely nothing linen, silk, or cotton based, anything like traditionally like hot weather fibers that was remotely the right color. They were all way too yellow or way too green or way too light or way too dark. Just nothing would have not looked marled, which then brought me to sort of a crossroad where my options would be continue knitting this as I have been, so not pairing anything extra, or pairing it with a plant-based fiber that I have found here that is not in as close of a color match as I want. So it's going to pull the sweater either more green or more yellow. Like it's going to stop feeling chartreuse and it's going to start feeling green apple green or yellow yellow, and close up I'll be able to see some marling. Or I let go of the idea of it being as lightweight and not hot as possible and start looking at mohair options. So I was basically faced with this dilemma of preserving the color or preserving the sort of function that I wanted this garment to serve. And like, was there also a possibility where I just decided to use this yarn for a different project and then got a different yarn for the collet? Absolutely. There just isn't really one of those that I currently want to do. Like the amount of this cotton lino that I have, if I were then actually using it as like a fingering or sport weight yarn, and the kind of pattern that would be, I already have some plans of the next couple projects that I want to work on after my collet, which is already after I finish my Lyon, and I don't love having a big queue, and just the idea of abandoning this vision. Like I just have this vision in my head of the collet in this citrine green, and I can't let it go. I wasn't ready to let it go. I stubbornly wanted to make it work, and I concluded that the color was more important to me than the garment staying as unwarm as possible. Like I concluded that what is special to me about this yarn is the color, and I don't want to waste that by mixing it with something that will shift the color just for the sake of having a less hot sweater when I can just knit a different less hot sweater later. Like I do believe in trying to knit things that will work practically for me in my life, but I also believe in not letting that mean that I don't knit something that I'm really excited about the idea of knitting, and know that I will still get plenty of use out of, even if it's in a different way from like the most practical possible way that I was initially envisioning, if that makes sense. And part of this consideration also was that I spent so much money on this yarn in the first place because I was obsessed with the color. So to ruin this color at this point seemed very silly. Now, is that a sunk cost fallacy? We'll see in a moment, but because I ordered this directly from the Wandering Flock online, and that order of 3 skeins plus shipping cost me $134 Canadian. But then I got hit with UPS fees, so that cost me an extra $55. And this is, God, I hate it when couriers take things across the border, because you'll look at the slip and it'll be like, your actual taxes were only $12, but we're gonna charge you $40 for just telling you that, for just getting it across the border and dealing with that for you. When the brokerage fees are like several times the actual customs fees, it's so annoying. But anyway, so we have spent a lot of money already on this yarn, and I don't want to ruin it by pairing it with something that is too green or too yellow. So once I decided that I was like willing to consider mohair as an option, we started looking at all of those and we narrowed it down to a few options that were kind of the best, the closest color matches. And there was one that was quite close, but it was just like a little bit duller than this was. And I don't remember what the brand was. But then they also had the Wandering Flock mohair in the color citrine. So like specifically designed to match this. And of course it was the best match. Of course it was. It's so much more vibrant, which I can show you because it's the one that I bought. Despite the fact that it is the most expensive of the options, you can't deny how good a match that is. It could not be a better match. And actually one thing that I really like about this is that the silk core is just as green as the rest of it. Like a lot of silk mohair has a tendency to have a light core that you can see and create a bit of a marled effect, even if like the mohair part itself is a good match. So this one, it's so perfect. Like I was debating between our sort of short list options of colors and more than one person walked by and is like, oh, you have to get that one. That one is definitely the best one. So unfortunately for me, the best one was the most expensive one. Isn't that so often the way? Also, unfortunately for me, the yardages of these do not align very nicely. So the Cotton Lino comes in 300 meter skeins. I have 3 of them. And again, I kind of suspect that I'm going to need like as much of this as I have. Like, I don't think I'm gonna have much, if any, left over, which means that if I have 900 meters of this, I think that I need to have 900 meters of this. This, which comes in skeins of 393 meters, which is just a very awkward number to divide 900 by. Because what do you get when you divide 900 by that? You get like 2.2 something. Like I need so little of the third skein, but enough that it seems like a bad idea to not have it because I'm not confident that I'm not gonna need that extra amount of this to get the body to the length that I want. So these are $48 Canadian skeins and I had to buy 3 of them. Can we have a moment of silence for the price on this project? Because as previously discussed, this, 3 skeins of this, including UPS, cost me almost $200 Canadian. And then 3 skeins of this, $48 Canadian times 3 plus tax, came out to $162.72. That's like a whole sweater cost of very nice yarn just for the mohair that we're now adding on to our almost $200. Which means that all in, between my Cotton Lino, my silk mohair, and the pattern cost, we are now looking at a total project cost of $363 Canadian, or about $250 US. So it's been quite a saga to get to this point, but I now have, I believe, all the yarn that I need to complete this project. I have the start of the sweater that I will be frogging so I can recover that yarn. And then the next thing that I need to do is reknit my swatch using this. And part of that is that I need to decide, maybe try some things out and figure out, am I keeping the same needle size and just adding in the mohair to see how much that fills it in and whether I'm satisfied with that? Or do I want to try going down like a very small amount of needle size difference, like enough that I'm hoping it won't affect my gauge too much, but will give me like a slightly denser fabric in a way that I was feeling like wouldn't really have been worth doing, sticking with only the Cotton Lino, because to adjust it by any amount that wouldn't make me run out of yarn, I think would have closed it so little that I'm not sure it would have made a difference. But I'm wondering if that little amount plus the mohair would make enough difference put together. I hopefully still wouldn't run out of yarn. And again, I would be okay with this one being 3/4 length. So I don't know, I have some kind of like details of that to figure out still, but for now I'm gonna focus on finishing my Lyon. And then this is kind of a problem for once I'm ready for my next project. Oh, and then one more knitting related thing that I wanted to mention is that a couple people messaged me drawing my attention to a new pattern release that's sort of akin to what I was trying to do with my dog walking gloves, where I knit this sort of like weird hybrid like fingerless glove trigger finger mitten situation. And someone has actually now made a real pattern that's very similar to what I was trying to do. And that's the Split Mitten with 2 Flaps by Tom Who Knits. So if you were watching me do that and you were like, I like this idea, but I'm not gonna like figure out my own, I don't know, unconvinced, or like maybe I would rather it if this was different or that was different. This might be exactly what you're looking for. So it's a sort of fingerless glove mitten hybrid where your middle finger, ring finger, and pinky finger are together in one sort of convertible mitten pocket. And then your index finger and thumb are each fingerless and have their own tiny little flap that you can use. And there's this beautiful intricate cable design all over the back of the hand. So I think it's a stunning pattern in addition to being a very like detailed, like finicky, specific use case kind of pattern. And I'm just so glad that this exists in the world. So if this is something that you feel like you could use, now you know that someone's actually made a proper pattern for it. Now, one last knitting thing that I have to share with you is a small sort of acquisition, which I should have mentioned in my last podcast, but I forgot. But for Christmas, I received the Gilmore Girls knitting book. So this is this super cute book of patterns, all inspired by the show Gilmore Girls, which is like my comfort watch. I have seen that show 1,000,000 times all the way through. I actually a couple weeks ago went to a Gilmore Girls trivia night where there were 25 teams and my team came in first place. So I like to believe that I have really earned my Gilmore Girls fandom, and it was very appropriate for my family to buy me this for Christmas. So I was flipping through this and looking at what patterns are available, and I recognized a recent knit from Knits by Mandy, the Oi with the Poodles Already cowl. So this book is kind of a funny combination of some patterns that are like very practical and I would actually wear, and some things that are like very clear references to the show, but like, when would I ever wear the little golf hat that Rory wears when she goes golfing with her grandfather? Like, I'm not actually gonna wear that, but I think it's hilarious that this is in here. So then you go from that to like Jackson's skull cap, which like this is a much more basic like wearable hat, right? So the book has kind of a good variety in that way. But there is one pattern that I have my eye on that I would really like to knit someday, and that is the Luke Steiner pullover. Because who among us would not love to be a regular at Luke Steiner and to wear this sweater? So I would really like to make that at some point. This is a sport weight yarn. Sport weight is coming to haunt me now. I swear I've never seen any sweater written for sport weight, and here we are. There's also some cute blankets like this one inspired by the Firelight Festival. So this book is really a fun combo of like very practical and kind of impractical. Like, look at these little dolls you can knit. So this book is a fun combo of sort of like quirky whimsical things and more practical things, but it's a really nice book. It's beautiful hardcover. It has nice like embossed gold on the spine. It's a really good gift if you have a knitter in your life who's a Gilmore Girls fan. Also, fun fact, the pilot of Gilmore Girls was actually filmed not on the WB lot where the rest of the show was filmed. It was filmed in Unionville in Markham, Ontario, which is not far from where I am. I actually drove through there a few weeks ago. I was kind of like roughly in the area and was like, I'm close to where the Gilmore Girls pilot was filmed. So I deliberately drove down sort of the main street that was used for like the street shots in Stars Hollow, and past where the place was that was used for Luke Steiner was actually now a med spa. Driving down that road in the evening with all the like winter lights still up, it was so pretty and really felt like driving through Stars Hollow. So if you are a Gilmore Girls fan and you are in the GTA, I highly recommend a little tour down Main Street, Unionville, because it's magical. Okay, now that's all the knitting updates that I have for you today, but because it has been quite a while since I've done a standard podcast update episode, because I was doing my 1 year on YouTube sort of stats recap videos in between, I have a lot of book updates for you because I think my reading slump has been broken, and it's also been far sort of accelerated by the fact that I've started listening to audiobooks, which I historically have sort of struggled with and have sort of continued to in certain ways. But as I get into the books, I'll sort of talk a bit more about what I've been finding has worked for me and what hasn't in terms of using audiobooks. So as usual, all the books I'm talking about are going to be linked in the description below as both physical books and audiobooks. And the first book that I finished since we last caught up was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And so this is one where I was saying in my last episode, I don't really know how I feel about this one yet. Like, I'm feeling uncertain, but also like I'm getting through it really quickly. So kind of what does that mean? And you know, I finished it kind of feeling the exact same way. Like, I got through it really fast. It was a quick read. And I feel like, yeah, it was all right. I have my complaints, but like, I kind of feel about it the way I feel about like a good Hallmark movie, you know? I'm like, was this life-changing? Did this give me snippets that are gonna like be in my brain forever, forming the way that I think and who I am as a person? No. Did I have a good time for a few hours? Yeah, that's how I feel about The Midnight Library. I think that it was Carly Thorne in her like recap of all the books she read this year talking about it. She was saying, and I might be kind of misremembering this, filling in gaps based on my own experience with it, but I think she was saying that the premise of it, so someone is like basically about to die and ends up in this like purgatory that is in the form of a library, where she gets to investigate all of the different lives she could have led if she had made any different decisions at any point in her life. Just like, if I had done this instead of that, what would the rest of my life have been? And she gets to sort of test out a bunch of those options. And Carly basically said, like, it's just sort of a kind of trite premise to begin with. And the writing just doesn't really do anything to counteract that. Like, it is kind of just as kind of Hallmarky as that sounds, like, for both better and worse, right? Like, who does not love a Hallmark movie at the right moment, right? But like, did this feel earth-shattering to read? No, because it's kind of exactly what I thought it was gonna be, you know? And I saw Carly talk about it in this way before I read it. So in a way, like, I'm sure that was in my head kind of influencing things. But before I'd seen her say that, I had seen way more people just talk about how much they just loved the book. Just like, new favorite book or book of the year or whatever. And just as I was reading it, I was just sitting there feeling like Carly was right. Of all the voices that I heard, Carly's was the one who I agree with. So again, I enjoyed it. Like, I think for me, it's just like, it's a great 3-star read. Like, that's kind of how I feel about it. I wish it did more for me than it did. Hi, Bucky. Do you want to come say hi? What up? Hey. Yeah, you can play the piano. Hi. You want to come hang out for the books portion? Oh. And the next one I finished after that one is an audiobook, because so what happened is that I am an affiliate for Libro FM. So anytime I'm linking audiobooks, there are links to them on Libro FM, which I love, because when you buy through Libro FM instead of Amazon Audible, it's actually supporting an independent bookstore. And then after I was approved as an affiliate, I found that they had this separate program. It's basically a program for influencers to get advanced copies of audiobooks, like in hopes that they will talk about them and promote them. And I applied on a whim, being like, there's no way they're gonna approve me. Like, I have like the smallest account. They have no incentive to approve me to this program. And then they did, which means that every month I get to pick 10 of their advanced release copies that I can just listen to for free. And I was like, well, I'm always listening to podcasts while I walk Hopper, so maybe I should just try listening to audiobooks because they're free. So I might as well try it, right? And so I'm limited to what are like the new releases that are available. But once I download it and add it to my library, like it's just there and I can listen to it whenever I want. So it's a little bit easier than like the library system where you have to request it. And then as soon as it's ready for you, like you only have X amount of time to listen to it. So using that, I've actually gotten through 3 books already and I'm like halfway through a 4th. Now, none of these are ones that I feel like very strongly positively about. Like they're kind of ones where I'm like, all right, like it was free. Otherwise, I was just gonna be listening to a podcast. At least I read some books. None of them were life-changing. One of them I forgot to write down. I can't remember the title of right now. Something about the idea of like the Danish philosophy as it applies to work and like happiness at work and whatever. It was fine. Don't really feel like I got anything super life-changing out of it, but it entertained me on walks. Similarly, I listened to Heartbreak is the National Anthem by Rob Sheffield, the book about Taylor Swift. And this one I also found odd certain ways. Like what it reads like to me, because it's very clear that Rob knows a ton about Taylor Swift and that like he is a fan and he reiterates this many times in the book, but it almost reads to me like he was so afraid of just coming off as like an uncritical, unabashed fan that he kind of like overcorrected, because so much of the book reads very like snarky and critical of her to me in ways that like are not even the things that I would criticize. Like I think that it's very valid to criticize Taylor Swift. Like she's a billionaire. There's a lot baked in right there that I could be critical of. And like, I really enjoy her music and I think she's a very skilled artist. And I think there are plenty of valid things that I can and do critique her for. And those just aren't even like what the book is kind of being snarky about. Like it just kind of felt unnecessarily mean to me at points, or just like, just things being stated like objective fact that simply aren't. Like just like, and that's when she put out her worst song. And I'm like, says you. I mean, I don't know. I found the tone kind of off-putting in that way. And I also think that just if I knew less going into the book, that I probably would have found it more interesting because I would have learned a lot. But I simply know too much lore at this point. Like there just wasn't really enough new for me, which is not a book problem. That's a me oversaturating my brain problem. But yeah, I didn't love it. Again, it was entertaining enough on walks, but I just kind of kept being sort of annoyed by like how he said things. And the third one that I finished is The Burnout Doctor by Claire Ashley. And this one, again, I wouldn't have even been reading this if it weren't like a free advanced reader copy. Like, reading this book, it's very clear to me that I'm not experiencing work burnout, because that's very severe. Like the thing that kind of prompted me to pick it up was that I've just been feeling like a little bit less focused than usual at work, just having a bit of a harder time feeling invested in it day to day. But like that is nowhere near approaching what the book is trying to address. So already like, okay, I'm probably not like the target audience, but I do think there's value in trying to figure out how to like prevent issues and things like that. And the book does get into that. But reading this book, it felt like half of the book was just trying to tell me which part of the book to read. Like there was a lot of like, if this is you, maybe jump ahead to this section. If this is you, go back and read that chapter another time because that's really important for you. Like there was just so much of the sort of choose your own adventure book style pointing you places that I was like, are you even telling me anything in between all these page directions? And like, yes, the answer is yes, but I don't know. It just felt sort of repetitive to me. And again, like maybe if it felt more directly relevant, maybe I would have felt like I was hearing more like distinct things, and maybe it's just because it didn't really apply to me very directly that I feel like it all kind of like became a wash together. But yeah, again, it was fine. And then the next audiobook that I started listening to is The Lake of Lost Girls by Catherine Green. And this is where it really clicked for me what my issue is with audiobooks. And that issue is fiction. I simply have a much harder time following audiobooks that are fiction. Like, just to like get inside of a world is a lot harder for me when I'm not following along in a book. So that's when I just sort of realized that like my sweet spot with audiobooks is nonfiction. For some reason, I just find it much easier to follow nonfiction than fiction in that format, which honestly I'm pretty happy with because I don't read a lot of nonfiction the book, physical book way, because it's just not what I tend to enjoy reading in that format. So I'm actually kind of excited about that prospect. But at the time that I figured this out, I was about halfway through The Lake of Lost Girls. And at that point I was like, you know, like, okay, I don't think I'm like that attached to this book. It's fine. I just will not finish this one and I will just start a nonfiction book instead. And I did. And then a couple days went by and I was like, I really want to know what happened with that book. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I realized that I was more invested in the story than I thought that I was. And I was invested enough that I actually decided to order a hard copy of the book so that I could finish it the way that I wanted to, because I really wanted to finish reading it. So here it is. I really enjoyed this book. First, I was not entirely sold. It's like a thriller mystery sort of thing. The premise is that the older sister of the main character went missing years ago in college, and so did a few other girls, but police didn't like connect the dots at the time and they were treated separately. And in the modern era of like true crime podcasts, etc., this case has sort of been reopened and new secrets come out, and was just really on board the whole time. The ending threw me. Granted, I'm not good at predicting books as they go. That's just not a thing that I'm usually good at. So don't put too much stock in me saying that the plot twist really got me, but the plot twist really got me. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one more than I realized that I did at first. But yeah, it got me hooked. And then after that one, because like I said, I'm on a reading roll, I read Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. So I talked a few months ago about reading her book. What is it called? Not Meet Me at the Lake. That's her one that I haven't read. Where is it? This Summer Will Be Different. That's the one. So I absolutely loved this book. And I was like, okay, I need to read some more Carly Fortune. And I did. And I loved it. Like, this book got its hooks in me on that emotional level that the Midnight Library could not. Like, this one, I loved them so much. I think part of it is also like the setting of this. It's set at a lake in Ontario that feels so reminiscent of My Family's Cottage and is so much the vibe of the manuscript that I'm in the process of querying right now. Like, that's the kind of setting that I used, and just the way that she evokes it, I'm like, oh God. Like, what she made me feel with that is the way that I hope that my writing will make other people feel about it. And I just, like, this really feels like a spiritual sibling to my manuscript, because the premise of this book is that it's about these two now adult characters who grew up together as like neighbors at their family cottage, and it flashes back to their relationship back then, and in the present it's a romance. So it kind of feels to me like this could be the adult novel sequel to like the YA manuscript that I wrote. They just feel like they have so much the same like heart to them. Loved it. All right, that's all I've got for you today. So thanks so much for coming to knit with me. If you'd like to be here next time, I hope you'll consider subscribing if you're not already. If you already are, you're my favorite. And I'll see you next time.